to the adventures of Math Girl. With the help of Pocket Ronnie, you also can become a trusty sidekick of Math Girl like PreCalculus in the Daring Derivative. Okay, we're going to do more solving for the unknown with degrees, minutes, and seconds. So in 5C4, we have a triangle, a right triangle. You use trig functions when it's a right triangle. And here we're trying to solve for H and G, the unknown sides, and we're trying to find the unknown angle alpha. And we're supposed to round, always read your instructions, we're supposed to round our answers to the nearest tenths. And we're given the hypotenuse length, and we have this angle here that's 50 degrees, 42 minutes, and 30 seconds. The one thing when you're finding the other angles, since this is a right angle of 90 degrees, these two angles will add up to 90, because inside of a triangle you have 180 degrees. The one thing to make sure is that this angle and this angle add exactly to 90 degrees. Not 90.01, not 89.99, but exactly to 90 degrees. And a good practice to get into is if they give you the degrees, or give you the angle in degrees, minutes, seconds, this angle should be in degrees, minutes, seconds. Use the same units in the problem that they use. So, with that being said, then I'm going to do this by hand because it's easier to do it by hand. Sometimes you can do it in your calculator, but if you're doing it in your calculator and you're converting this to decimal and then you're subtracting from 90, make sure in degrees, minutes, seconds this adds exactly to 90, okay? So I'm going to do it by hand so you can see me do it by hand. Okay, we can find alpha by taking 90 minus 50 degrees, 42 minutes, and 30 seconds, okay? Well, I have 0 minutes, 0 seconds. I can't do 0 minus 30 or 0 minus 42. So what do? I borrow. So here, borrow 89 degrees. This becomes 60 minutes. Well, I still can't subtract from here, so borrow from here. That becomes 59 minutes, and this becomes 60 seconds. So I borrowed each step of the way. The fact that this ends in 30 seconds tells me I do need to end up with an angle that is 30 seconds, because 30 seconds and 30 seconds is a whole minute. Okay? 60 minus 30 is 30. Now you can subtract these. This will end up being 17 minutes and then 39 degrees. So you want to make sure that this angle here, so now we're saying alpha equals 39 degrees, 17 minutes, and 30 seconds. That's one of my answers. You need to make sure that alpha and this other angle add up to exactly 90. I can go back and check. My seconds add up to a minute. 42 and 17 is 59, plus this minute, that'd be 60, and that adds to another degree. So you want to make sure that everything adds up to exactly 90 degrees, and they will. Okay, now that I know alpha, I can now solve for G and H. Not again, but use the information given to solve your problems. In case I calculated this wrong, I'm not going to use this in my calculations. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is solve for G. How do I solve for G? If I'm standing here at the angle that was given to me, G is the opposite. I've been given the hypotenuse. So what deals with opposite and hypotenuse? That would be sine. Okay, so sine theta equals opposite over hypotenuse. Let's fill in what I know. Sine of the angle I'm standing at, which is 50 degrees, 42 minutes, and 30 seconds, equals opposite, which is G, over hypotenuse, which is 250. This is the same thing we did in the last lesson, except now we have degrees, minutes, seconds. So now you can convert this in your calculator into a decimal. So if I converted that into a decimal, 50.71. So that's 50.71 degrees. And then this looks just like we had last lesson. So I can put this into a fraction, then I can use cross multiplication to solve this. So sine of 50.71 degrees times 250 equals G. Doing that using my calculator to find sine of 50.71 degrees, that came out to 0.7740. If I round to 4 decimal places, it came out to 395, but I'm rounding up to 40. Anytime you take a trig function with an angle and turn it into a decimal, you should use 4 decimal places. So multiplying that by 250, I got G to be 193.49. And remember, we don't have any units on these because they didn't give us any units in the problem. Okay, now I need to solve for H. So if we know that G is 193.49, there are several different things you can use to solve for H. You can either use Pythagorean theorem to find H, because you now know if you know 2 sides of a triangle, you can use Pythagorean theorem to find the 3rd side, or you can use a trig function to solve for H. So if you're standing here and H would be the adjacent to you, and I would still use the hypotenuse because that's given information. This is calculated, and if you calculated that wrong, and then you use this calculations to calculate this was wrong, now that's going to be wrong. It becomes a domino effect. Try to use the information given to you to solve any unknowns. So if I'm standing here, I have adjacent and then hypotenuse. Adjacent and hypotenuse would be cosine. So you could say cosine theta is adjacent over hypotenuse. Fill in what you know. Cosine of this angle, we already said 50 degrees, 42 minutes and 30 seconds was 50.71 degrees. And the adjacent side is H, all over 250. If we cross multiply, then we're getting cosine of 50.71 degrees times 250 equals H. I'm just going to go ahead and do all that in my calculator. So cosine of 50.71, I got 0.6332. 0.6332. And then I'm going to multiply that to 250. And that gave me 158.31. Okay, so I forgot that the instructions say round your answers to the nearest tenth, and I wrote the hundredth. So 158.31 will just be 158.3. 193.49, that actually will round to 0.5. So that's rounding to the tenth. Okay, so now we're going to be doing 5C number 7, and the instructions are here. They want you to find the unknown angles, alpha and theta, and they want you to find the angles to the nearest 100th degree and the nearest second. In other words, they want the angles in a decimal to the nearest 100th place, and they want the angles in degrees, minutes, seconds to the nearest second. So anytime you see this to the nearest second, that means degrees, minutes, seconds. So you need to put it in decimal and degrees, minutes, seconds. Okay? We don't have to find this unknown side. We just need to find the unknown angles. Okay? So to do that, you have to use trig functions. Okay? Can't use Pythagorean theorems to find angles. You can only use trig functions. So you can find whichever angle you want to first. So I'm just going to do theta. So if I'm this little man standing at theta, if I'm standing here, this side would be opposite of me, and this is the hypotenuse. So opposite and hypotenuse. What trig function uses opposite and hypotenuse? That would be sine. Sine theta is opposite over hypotenuse. So let's fill in what we know. We don't know theta, that's what we're trying to find. But the side opposite of me, 16, hypotenuse is 29. So we can now divide that out and put it into a decimal. And when you're dealing with trig functions, you always do to 4 decimal places. So 16 divided by 29 is 0.5517. A minute ago, when we were given the decimal and trying to find the angle, that's when we use the arc sign. So essentially what you're doing is you're finding this arc sign of 0.5517 is what angle? This is where you use the second button on your calculator for sine. So on your calculator, you're doing the inverse sign. So you're doing the second button with the inverse sign, and then 0.5517. Now you hit enter, and so that will be 33.48 degrees. Okay, so now that is 33.48 degrees. It said to go to the nearest hundredth in decimal. So that's one of your answers. Then it wanted you to change it into degrees, minutes, seconds. For me, what I would do is just leave all of this in your calculator. Don't take it out. Now you can change that into degrees, minutes, seconds. This is in decimal form. To go to DMS, hit your DMS button, then arrow over all the way to where you get to your DMS, hit enter. Now you're telling you want to take that answer and convert it to DMS and hit enter. And so now you have it at 33 degrees, 29 minutes, and 1.39 seconds. So I would just round. You can either say 1 second, it would round down to 1 second. So, or actually that's, yeah, round down to 1 second, 1.39, 1.3, round down to 1 second. So you can say 33 degrees, 29 minutes, and 1 second. Some of your answers may be a little off, especially in the seconds. If you're off just a little bit by a little bit from the book's answer in the seconds, it's not as a big deal. But you can take this decimal and then straight convert it to that. Okay, so that's theta. I better label this as theta so I know. Okay, so there's theta in decimal and degrees, minutes, seconds. So now we need to find alpha. Yes, you can go back and stand here and use a trig function, but in our reality, let's make it easier on yourself. The degrees of a triangle all add up to 180 degrees. Okay, we already know this is 90, so these two angles have to add up to 90 degrees. 90 plus 90 is 180. So we already know theta is 33.48, so in order to find alpha, it's just 90 degrees minus 33.48 degrees, because alpha and theta need to add up exactly to 90 degrees. So 90 minus that, alpha would be 56.52 degrees. That's in decimal. Okay, now we need to take that and convert that into degrees, minutes, seconds. So when we convert that to degrees, minutes, seconds, then I'm going to get 56 degrees, 31 minutes, and 12 seconds. But you need to look at these. If they don't add up exactly to, if your degrees, minutes, seconds for both of them don't add up to exactly 90, something went wrong. 1 second and 12 seconds is only 13 seconds. Okay, your seconds need to add up to a whole minute. In other words, 60 seconds. This second and this seconds needs to add up to 60. So something went wrong, or something is off in the rounding. It's not went wrong, it's off in the rounding. So something needs to be changed. So these will be a little off, but you need to make sure that these add up exactly to 60 seconds. So if you're going to say 1 second here, then this one over here needs to say 59 seconds. Is that going to work? 59, 60, 10? No, because then this would need to say, this would need to be 30. Because now that would be 1 second and 59 seconds is 60 seconds, which is a minute. Then 30 and 29, that's 59. Add this minute here would be 60 minutes. And then that would add up to exactly 90 degrees. I'm not as concerned if you're off from rounding on the seconds, but I am concerned that they add exactly to 90 degrees.